Hello and welcome to the Agonisers podcast, episode 2.
The dust hangs heavy on a stained glass night. A static TV is our only light. And for a moment you heard something more. The moment has gone, just a whisper passing by the door.
I will hide you in my passions in the back room. The street signs flicker in the midnight light as the gentlemen cheer to the last, my dear.
My name is Remy77077 and yes, you're listening to Agonisers, the currently very irregular podcast about all things gaming from an Agoner's perspective. In fact, this show is so irregular that the last one I recorded was about 5 years ago now, so why another podcast right now? Well, my guest today is a chap called Jose. He has been a friend of Agoner's for over a decade now, almost since I started running Agoner's as a website, actually. And in the past, I've played lots of video games with Jose, and we've met up and had lots of chats online. And we've had some really big discussions about gaming, and he's someone that I've really appreciated his perspective, and I've actually wanted him to write articles for Agoner's in the past, but it never really enticed him to do that. So, but yes, he definitely sees some things similarly to the way I do with regards to gaming in general, but he definitely has a different perspective on some things. So, yeah, we'd had some brief online chats, and I really wanted to get to hear more of his thoughts about this particular topic. And rather than trying to get him to write a formal article, as I had in the past, I thought a podcast would be a really great way to kind of pick his brain and have a discussion in a more interactive format that I could talk to him at the same time. And what topic am I asking him about, you may want to know? Well, that is Project L, which is the codename for Riot Games, their new fighting game. Now, if you're an avid follower of all things Agoner's, you will know that I discussed some of my thoughts about Project L before, actually, on another podcast out on YouTube called Pirates vs. Agoner's that I did with Thy Pirate King. So go and have a listen to that if you would like. And I do go over some of those thoughts again here with Jose. So yes, I could tell from having a very brief chat prior to this with Jose that he had, as I say, a very different take on things to me. Partly because he knows a lot more about Riot as a company than I do. And he's been a fairly avid fan of their League of Legends game for a long time now. And he's played some of their other more recent titles. So this is all about Project L, a discussion between myself and Jose. On with the show. Enjoy. You obviously know a lot about Riot as a company, and you play League of Legends. I know a fair bit about fighting games, and I play lots of fighting games. And I've also I did read a lot a few months ago when the Project L kind of news first broke, as you prefer to call it, just the Riot fighting game.
Yeah.
But so I've spoken in the past, and I've got some pretty, I guess, fairly pessimistic views about how I think it might go. But I think you're a bit more optimistic about it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we shot each other some messages before, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this whole idea spawned because it seemed like you were overly pessimistic, at least in my opinion. And I thought I had maybe a decent chance of getting some solid predictions out, especially once with the big revelation of new titles from Riot last year, of seeing what they would do with the other genres that they're trying to break into, and seeing how they handled those, and projecting that onto what they would be doing with Project L or the Riot.
Right. No, I understand because obviously you know a lot more about those other titles than I do. So could you tell me a bit more about them? Because I know one's, say you told me one's called Runeterra and one's called Valorant, right? But they're
Yes.
actually one's a card game, I guess.
Yeah. So to give you the rundown, this has only been pretty recently, right? I've been mostly playing League, and I've taken a massive break from League in a couple of years past now. So it's not like I've been playing League all along, but I was with League for like 6 or 7 years, right? From like 2010 when it launched to up until like a couple of years ago. And after they announced all their new games, and also I think after the launch, I think the launch of Teamfight Tactics, the Riot Auto Battler, that came after the Valve the mod, I think it was it Dota 2 mod? I'm not even exactly sure, but there was an auto battler from Valve, and then Riot made an auto battler called Teamfight Tactics, and soon after they revealed that they had a lot more games planned, and
Right.
the internet lost their shit, and everybody started speculating, and well, I thought it was pretty good news that they wanted to try and make a fighter based on my experiences, on what they did with Dota or their version League of Legends. So I was kind of interested to see what would happen. And just recently we had the launch of Runeterra, first the beta and then the launch, and then we had first the beta and then the launch of Valorant, which just launched like a week ago or something, like a couple of days ago. So this is all pretty fresh information, right? Like
Yeah.
a year ago I couldn't have told you any of those things because all this is pretty recent. Like the information about how Riot approaches new genres is super fresh, which is also why I think it's somewhat relevant, right? We can see what they're doing, what they're trying to do right now, and I think at least a couple of projections can pretty safely be made on what they are going to do with the fighting game, like base, right? With the concept of a fighting game.
I got you. Yeah, no, that's fair because let's say the last time I seriously thought about it, I was forgetting how long ago it was actually. 2020 has crept up on me. It was like sort of like October last year when the first announcements were made. I think it was when Evo was. That's when they officially sort of put out a tiny bit. There's been no actual new information on the actual fighting game though, right?
Was it Evo? I actually don't remember.
Yeah, it was, and there was literally like a 3 seconds of footage and like a few screenshots, and then they said we're going to go dark for 2 years minimum. You're not going to hear about it again. Yeah,
That's last year, and now they're already announcing it for what is it? Fall, autumn?
Oh, the fighting game.
Yeah.
Oh, there has been new news then. All right, sorry, update me because I wasn't aware of anything
that's
brand
bad.
new.
I should have looked it up. I think. Hold on.
That's okay.
I think they have. Yeah, the game is anticipated to release sometime in 2020, although there has been no concrete information yet. So I'm pretty sure it's confirmed 2020. And you didn't know that? Okay. I guess I wasn't even sure about the information myself, but I thought there was something. So I got that one correct then. So
That's surprising then.
Definitely not 2 years. Yeah.
No, that's moved up
then. This came so
then.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they made these announcements in 2019, and everyone was like, okay, that's going to be a thing like 3 years from now. I remember talking to a friend of mine about a shooter that we were, moderately excited about, and we were like, well, it's going to be a thing like 3 years from now, once they were actually done, making the whole game. But then 2020 comes around, and suddenly, like, first quarter, you already get the card game and like the shooter beta, and now they're both out in, after half a year's time, which is pretty crazy. And now the fighter is on its way as well. So it's all moving really fast.
Yeah, that's intentional. Then maybe they've decided that they want to. They deliberately want to move up the schedule for some reason. It sounds like that's the case.
I think it's pretty reasonable to say that League of Legends reached a certain saturation. I would say their player base has been growing over the years. Has been growing pretty strongly over the years, right? And I'm pretty sure we're getting to a point where numbers aren't really growing anymore. Maybe they haven't for a couple of years. So it's getting to the point where, as a company, they want to put the S in Riot Games, right, and not just make League. So it's possible that that they wanted to try, throw a couple and see what sticks, because they're expanding into multiple genres, right? And it's very possible that, at least considering how cheap the Teamfight Tactics and Runeterra are to make, that they're just, trying a sprinkler strategy where they just try all the genres and see if they get particularly successful in any one of them, right?
That's fair point. Okay.
But obviously, it's pure speculation. I have no idea what their plan is. Ultimately, they're a Chinese company that might try to take over the world, right? For all we know. But yeah, I mean, it's all fresh information. So I guess I'll let you know what I think to know about the titles they've released just recently, right?
Yeah.
So the Teamfight Tactics, I can really not speak much about, because I barely played it, and I know extremely little about the auto battle genre. So
me neither. I didn't even know that was out, so I'd never even heard of it.
It was the first one they released. Besides
Right.
League, Teamfight Tactics. It's even in the client integrated. It's funny, they made this huge mess of a spaghetti code client, and now they don't even use it to feature their other games. You need a separate client for Valorant and Legends of Runeterra for some reason, but yeah, that's an entire different story. So Teamfight Tactics comes out, I don't really know much about it, and then they announced the Runeterra card game and a shooter, and I tried both of them. I think I played quite a lot more Runeterra than like the card game than the shooter, because first of all, it came out first, and second of all, it also speaks to me a bit more. I used to play FPS games, and I play like casual, like large-scale FPS games sometimes, but I'm not really one for the tactical FPS, right? I never played much Counter-Strike, which makes me not really the target demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more or less just a League of Legends to a CS:GO, if you want to call it that, right? They're trying to take what's good from tactical shooters, mostly Counter-Strike, and put their own spin on it, which is a decent concept.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I assume they use all their same characters and world setting in all the games, right?
They actually don't. And
okay.
Really. I mean, it's not a perfect fit, right? The League of Legends is a fantasy setting, whereas the tactical shooter one is very. To call it realistic, but I mean, you're shooting each other with like, clearly real life inspired guns, right? And you have very real life inspired mechanics behind it, where if you fire a gun for longer than half a second in full auto, you're not gonna hit anywhere near the center of your screen. If you get a headshot from a reasonably powerful gun, you immediately die. Yada yada. So it's not really a good fit, and it's probably the reason why they went with a different aesthetic. It's funny because one of the things that is probably, and this is kind of industry standard, but I think it's safe to say that the art design for all these titles, including League of Legends, it's somewhat lame and uninspired, right? The new Valorant design is pretty clean, right? It's seems to be designed to appeal to a younger audience as well. It's still, it features adult themes, so it's not like a Fortnite, I would say. Yeah, okay. It's not like a kids game, but it's very slick. It doesn't really have many edges, right? There's nothing that it really latches onto. And I mean, League of Legends is similar, right? League of Legends is just some fantasy aspects that we know, some gnomes, some like dwarfs, I guess, a lot of humans, and a lot of like.
I must admit, when I see, I'm obviously not particularly familiar with Dota or League of Legends, although I've played a little bit of them. And when I see the characters from either game, I don't even know which game it's from. For example, like
I mean, this is true for the fighting games as well, right? Like most of them don't feature particularly inspired art design. Some do, but most don't. And the new League titles follow suit in what League has already been doing, which is present decent art, like well executed art. Usually, right? Their animations are great. They do a good job on almost any aspect that is technical, but the design of it is pretty uninteresting. But this is probably not what everybody came here for. So I put down a couple of things that I think are easy to agree on and very observable, that both Valorant and Legends of Runeterra both share, right? Aspects of their production quality, of their design, and of their monetization, which is probably the 3 points that you care most about. Am I right
Yeah.
in assuming that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay.
So, in terms of production quality, most of them are pretty well crafted. This is not true for League, but for the new games, they seem to run on a pretty stable engine, right? Like the mobile implementation for the card game seems really well done, or at least
Okay.
industry standard well done. It might be a bit clunky to like try to hit tiny cards with your thumb, but for the most part, it's actually helps mobile games a ton to have such a great game accessible on mobile, right? But yeah, they feature a big focus on accessibility. For the most part, they have good tutorials. They have the sufficient features that you would expect from a game. Like you can have multiple decks in Legends of Runeterra. You can kind of see which cards you own. It has like for the most part what you would expect. You can in Valorant you can test all the heroes that you haven't unlocked yet and like learn their abilities, try the different guns in like a shooting range. You can practice your aim, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
So
That sounds good.
they,
Yeah.
they come with a good like amount of features. They have a pretty solid tech behind them. There's a pretty strong focus on competitive integrity in all of the design, and this is probably the thing that will clash over in the future as well, right?
Mhm.
Where you and the people in the Sterling community are what I would consider the competitive purists, which
Yeah.
don't accept anything except absolute, complete, even and fairness from literally the second you buy the game, which has to be a one-time payment, and then you own the thing. Or
I'll accept some wiggle room on that. I'm not
Yeah.
maybe not as quite as pure on that as you might expect, but definitely in
Okay.
terms of like, yeah, when I want to a fair way to play a game that's always going to be fair. There's no kind of advantage for someone that's grounded out, played more hours, got some advantage over me. It's basically I want it like chess. I sit down and there's not a key advantage to one player. Like or
I
like
totally get that.
virtually every fighting game is like this as well. But then there's DLC characters and things like that. So it's like okay, there are some ways. It doesn't have
Yeah,
to be.
this is the interesting discussion, and I think we should probably end on that instead of start with it. But yeah, for the most part, what I would say is the focus on the competitive aspect of the game is already reflected on production, right? And you have AFK detection, cheat detection, report systems. You have a client-side only skins and cosmetics that intentionally so that they don't disrupt. Like you can have a different sounding gun for a skin in Valorant, but your opponent is still gonna hear your sound for the unique sound it makes.
Wow.
So you can identify the gun you're using by identifying the sound, stuff like that, right?
That's interesting.
so-
Do
so-
you know a little bit about that, or is that something you've experienced?
What do you mean? Sorry.
The client side only thing, that's very interesting actually.
Yeah, it's.
me.
I mean, since I mean, this is a point of contention still, right? But since Riot generally focus on cosmetics that don't impact gameplay, right? Where it clearly does, like in Valorant, where you have weapon skins, right? And they intentionally designed weapons to make a sound that is recognizable and unique. If they're going to give you a skin that makes your weapon sound like a laser gun pew pew, they have to make it so it only sounds like this for you. Otherwise, the whole point of giving the gun a unique sound for competitive purposes is completely null and void, right? It doesn't make any sense. So that's why they keep it like this. Usually, there's not a big clash, right? Like usually, if a Runeterra player has like a different art on their board that they play their minions onto, or a different like 3D animated like guardian thingy creature next to their board, or a different card back, it doesn't really change the game at all, right? Like you don't really get an advantage for having purple cards instead of like red.
No,
cards.
of course not. It's just
This
very.
is mainly what they focus on with microtransactions. Sorry, what?
Yeah, no, just sort of winding it forward as to what you might see in a fighting game. One of the things that obviously people expect, and we'll probably come into more of this later again. But there's the whole, like, having lots and lots of cosmetic purchasable stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
which
skins.
seems to
So
be a strong expectation of you. And I'll get to talk about this in the monetization part, but let me quickly run down the
sure,
design and monetization parts, and then I'll go on to specifically what I think about Riot Fighting Game, okay?
sure,
For the design, there's really not too much to say. I think it's pretty easy to agree on that they have confidence in their design vision, so that they are not too afraid to challenge old standards. They will change some stuff if they think it doesn't fit their vision for the game, and even if this is something super old and super core to what the hardcore players consider to be, part of their game, they're going to change it anyways, right? Like they're not scared of like hardcore community backlash or whatever, right? They will try to listen to their players, but they're also like confident enough in their vision for the game to make some changes if they have to, if they think they have to. So this is quite important because again, this is what I believe gives the fighting game a chance to actually be interesting, right? They will change some stuff, might just be execution, who knows, but they're not just going to release a Street Fighter 6 or whatever, right? Which is probably the worst thing they could do, in my opinion, right? That would be the least interesting thing they could do, and they're probably not going to do that. Second thing is they're generally quite conservative with the changes they're making, so this reins it all back, right? They're not going to make a crazy new like design that really challenges fighting games at the core, like Dive Kick and maybe Fantasy Strike. Like they're not going to do this. They're going to try and make the game appeal to the people that played the games before, right? Like Counter-Strike Go players should feel somewhat at home in Valorant.
right.
Like Magic players should feel at home in Legend of Runeterra, and fighting game players will probably they're trying to design the game so that they feel at home in Project. Almost certainly that will be a clear focus on a design goal for them moving forward. I can say that with a lot of confidence.
Okay.
And thirdly, there's going to be a clear focus on the competitive aspect again. So a lot of balancing. They're not going to put bad characters or bad moves in a game that you're supposed to never use that are a noob trap, right? And they're going to do constant updates where they try to, fix overpowered characters. They're going to try to make the new characters not just all better versions of an already existing old character, stuff like this, right? They try to make the competitive aspect of their games a clear focus of their designs. It's very obvious that they want competitive players to play their games.
Yeah, I mean that's good, and I mean that's very important for a fighting game as well, since that's like
that's why it's interesting to us, right? That's why I'm pushing back hard on this notion of it's just going to be like a microtransaction grab, like what Heroes of the Storm has become, right? Like that's not what they're trying to make. They're obviously monetizing, but they're in the design itself, you can definitely tell that they care about making like a game that is meaningful as like a competitive pursuit for players.
Yeah, like I say, I'm definitely not expecting any kind of joke title out of this. It's. I mean, some people have suggested that they're trying to even become like the biggest fighting game around. Like,
I mean,
is that their kind of goal they've gone in, do you think, with these other titles? Are they trying to become like
I don't think so.
No, okay. They're just trying to be but especially if you're saying they're fairly conservative, they're making their own design, but they're being fairly conservative, sticking with kind of, so they're almost trying to become a part of that ecosystem of that type of genre, I guess.
The games very much to me feel like a best mix of what is already there.
Okay, so they're just putting their own mix on things.
Exactly. Okay. And what I can observe with the games that have come out is that, from what I can tell, for the most part, they seem to have their heads at the right place. So they're removing things that I think you and me would agree are bad, and they're generally focusing more on things that you and me would agree are good.
Okay.
So, and they have been doing the same thing with League, right? They tend to make interactive stuff, right? They try to reward skill, but not overly so that a team-based game suddenly isn't team-based anymore and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to keep the game lengths reasonable, yada yada. There's a lot of aspects of their games that they consider when it comes to design, and most of them are What is a game we think would be fun to play, engaging to play, and a good competitive game. And sometimes they come up with some pretty cool stuff, but for the most part, it's just iterative stuff, right? They take the best of what's there and make their own version of it.
Kind of like, I guess they're kind of doing would you compare them to Blizzard a little bit in that way? That's something.
Yes,
That's the kind of way that Blizzard designs their games. They don't tend to do something completely
exactly.
different, right?
I would say it's exactly the same, except from what I can tell, they just have a much more efficient company structure and maybe just better designers as well. But for the most part, they're doing a better job than Blizzard. Blizzard feels like they're a bit more behind the curve.
Yeah, I think they've kind of like lost track a little bit. I think in their heyday, that was something that people would have said exactly the same thing about Blizzard, right?
Yeah. And Blizzard had this strong focus on making stuff more accessible as well, right? Which does is the same for Riot. Like they're making money with League because they made Dota more accessible, right? That was a big focus of their changes to the core design aspects of Dota, was just take the clunky stuff out and make it just about the fun stuff that's clearly in Dota. Otherwise, the game wouldn't still be going.
Fair enough.
So yeah,
okay.
Third monetization, not that important to me honestly, but clearly very important to you.
It depends on how it interacts. Yeah,
exactly. It goes back to the notion that you believe that you can buy advantages, and this is just not really the reality I've seen. But the couple of things I wrote down was that Valorant is pretty similar to Fortnite and other battle royale games. It has like a season pass that you can buy that will like accelerate your grind and let you unlock more stuff by playing. It has some cheap skins. It has some expensive skin bundles from like $10 to $50. Pretty ordinary stuff. It doesn't have the $500 skins that Counter-Strike Go does, and it also doesn't have the marketplace where you could gamble or trade those things. So none of the like quite degenerate stuff that is going on the skin marketplace of Counter-Strike Go. Although Valve has shut that down recently, right? They noticed that their skin marketplace was just a money laundering machine, and they finally shut it down like a couple of months ago. If you didn't hear the news, that was quite interesting.
Wow. Okay. No, I
won't
cover
like
that now. But yes, that does sound interesting.
Runeterra makes a pretty big step forward in terms of monetization by abolishing packs. There are no card packs that you buy that have 5 garbage cards that you already own, and then you buy the next one, like Blizzard did with Hearthstone and Magic does, right? This is pretty huge. For the most part, I think Runeterra is probably the most accessible card game, customizable card game that you can get into, and I'd say it's pretty. I think it's not that hard to make 1 or even 2 competitive decks that you can grind to like the highest rank with on the rank ladder within like a week or 2 of starting to play the game, right? Just by earning cards with free to play and building decks that are that feature particularly cheap to build cards. So it's not only really it's not only good for abolishing card packs and letting you buy cards directly, it also is very generous in how many cards it hands you just by playing free to play, and how quickly it lets you like collect all the different cards. So Runeterra is pretty crazy in terms of monetization. It feels like you're getting a full customizable card game, possibly the best on the market, for basically free. But almost don't have to pay anything, which is pretty crazy.
Right. So if you do want to purchase like individual cards, how are they priced? Is every card individually priced as well?
That's actually a good question. I think the rare cards are more expensive, and I think they range from like 50 cents to like $3, something like that.
Right. So it is
like if you buy like a champion card, which you can have 6 of in your 30 card deck, I think those are $2 or $3. So if you buy a full deck from scratch, that will run you like $30 or so. But since it's so trivial to unlock like half of it just by playing like a week, chances are you'll only pay like $10 for any particular deck if you're willing to play like 10 hours of the game first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this gets. I mean, it's very complicated when you talk about an actual CCG, like a customizable collectible being the objective word in that makes this different. So obviously, I enjoy a model like Yomi card game, right? Where but then you've got set decks, or
but
even
it's
not customizable in the same way, or you've got trying to think of the name of it now. Serlin's other game that I've completely forgot the name of right now.
Right?
No, his newer one that's it's not. It doesn't have a digital version, which is why I've never really
I
played
think
it.
I've seen it on the
Codex,
on the-
apologies, Codex. Yeah, so in Codex there is some customization, like you choose various things and then you kind of like customize
But
it
it's
more as you play, but it's still not like a
limited.
CCG. Yeah, it doesn't have
You don't
that
pick
aspect.
every card. Yeah.
No, which is, I mean, I've got my own issues with that whole way of doing
Yeah.
it, but like if you're gonna do it, this sounds like they're doing it in a pretty good way.
Exactly. So if
Yeah.
you, as long as you're not opposed to the idea of the CCG, right? This
Yeah.
is probably the way to do it. And I would
Yeah.
go as far as saying the mechanics and the design of Runeterra is also just great. They took pretty much everything that was boring and annoying about Magic, right? And mixed a bit of modern stuff, right? You don't have to put mana in your deck anymore, and you have like all the advantages of like online card game where it can keep track of units losing HP and stuff and like temporary buffs and everything. They're taking advantage of that pretty well, and as a result, it's kind of what I think Hearthstone should have been, right? Where it's accessible, it's cheap, it really pushes CCGs forward, away from a thing where you have to pay like $1,000 to build the deck every half a year, where they release new cards and everything, to something that can be enjoyed by everybody, and that still has enough like strategic depth to not make it like a boring grind to play in most matches, and especially like aggressive matchups where both players might just be trying to play whatever they have in hand and end the game early or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? In Hearthstone, those tended to be very straightforward decision making wise, and not satisfying to play.
Almost
But,
like a
yeah,
coin flip.
Runeterra is actually, it's not quite the same, of course. But
Yeah.
Runeterra is probably the most fun CCG I've played, and I'm not even really a fan of the genre, so that's saying a lot, honestly. And its monetization is absolutely great. So this is the bottom line, right?
Yeah. Does it? Sorry, I know we're going off to a bit of a tangent and a lot
Yeah.
about Runeterra, but it's really interesting. You've definitely got me interested to give it a try, by the way. So
You should definitely
congrats.
give it
I honestly hadn't really paid any attention to it
Yes.
because I just don't follow anything
a
from
lot of
Riot
people
at the
don't.
moment.
Yeah. A lot of
Riot
people
are
don't
just
pay attention.
completely out of my radar in a way, so I hadn't heard about it. I guess because my main avenue for like gaming stuff is through Steam, and Riot aren't on Steam, so I don't really see them.
Oh yeah, that's
So that's a big impact to me, I suppose. And obviously I focus on fighting games mostly at the moment, but I do like a lot of strategy games, and I have enjoyed card games in the past, and I used to play Magic tournaments, things like that. So I've definitely got a bit of history with it. So I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah.
So does the company themselves price those individual cards then? Does Riot price them, or it's not like a marketplace thing? Because the issue obviously with
there's
Magic,
no marketplace for anything.
okay, brilliant. So I guess the only potential for something a bit annoying there is if, like, how do they set those prices? Do they go, oh, hang on, everyone wants this card all of a sudden, so we're going to put the price up? Like, do you get
that's
me?
not how
Like,
it works. They have a rarity which determines their price, and that's it.
okay, so if people, yeah, okay, well, that sounds
And unlike
really good.
Magic, they don't put cards in the set that are designed to just be garbage and put garbage in your booster packs. Since they're not selling booster packs, right? They can just make every card potentially good. Their design statement was that they want every card to be playable in some deck that has some competitive viability, right? The reality is, of course, there are cards that suck, since balancing is a process, but with the frequent updates they do and the frequent patches, for the most part, they're trying to make every card you own at least good in some way, right? Which is very different from, like, Hearthstone. I think it launched with like a 3 mana 2/3 and then a 3 mana 2/3 that just had an effect, right? And I think it might have been a class card, but like this is the kind of stuff that Magic already did, that just to earn more money, and this is the kind of stuff that's easy to criticize from like a competitive standpoint, where you're just saying, well, you're just putting stuff in the game that doesn't even need to be there, just to earn more money, which is kind of weird. But
yeah, I mean,
again,
that whole
Runeterra
sales
doesn't do that.
yeah, but that whole sales model actually completely incentivizes them towards being balanced as well, because ideally they want all their cards to be bought,
Exactly.
right? So
Yes.
that's a really, really good thing. That sounds excellent. So
Of
yeah,
course,
very
the reality
interesting.
is always different, since you have the best
yeah.
decks, and the best
Yeah.
decks use the best cards. But for like for the average player, right? If you only care about having some fun with the cards, you're not going to just be playing a literal worse version of the same card just by playing a different card, right? Like, they're trying not to do that, and if you are, chances are there's going to be something on the horizon, either nerfing the card that is just the worst version of, or the actual card you're playing getting better in, you know, a couple weeks in the future or whatever. So, yeah, Runeterra is doing a good job, and when it comes to, you know, selling you stuff that makes you, like, gives you a competitive advantage, there's pretty much none of this, right? Like, as long as you are fine with earning your cards through play or buying them, and accepting that you won't have access to every deck, besides cards, there's nothing you can purchase that impacts the gameplay, right? Everything else is fluff.
It's
right?
yeah, cosmetic stuff, yeah, which
And
we're pretty okay about.
And it's
Yeah.
important to understand that this is true for Valorant as well, and even for League today. Not in the past, but today. All
Brilliant.
three games have one feature you can buy money for, spend money for, that give you an advantage or give you, like, change the way you can play the game. And for Valorant and League, it's characters, and for Runeterra, it's cards, and there's nothing else.
Okay.
Everything else that impacts the gameplay cannot be grinded or
bought. Okay.
right? And in League, this is a bit of there's the caveat of the skins where you could argue, well, you know, a bright skin might be easier to see the skill shots off that they throw your way, and generally, if there's like a big offender where people are like, it's fucking impossible to see, you know, this like ability from this and this character with the skin, they're trying to fix that usually. There's some response there. So with League is the most extreme in terms of skins, because it's not just client-side skins, right? And you could argue that some skins are more visually like busy and harder to you know understand as playing against them. But even there, they're trying to, you know, make it as low impact as possible. They're trying, right? They're obviously, it's impossible, just like balancing. It's impossible to make it not have an impact at all, but they're trying to keep the impact low. And in the other games, there's simply no such thing, right? Valorant, there's the, you know, there's the skins for your guns, which don't matter. And in card games, you don't really, I mean, if you're getting psychologically demoralized by the card backs of your opponent, then, you know, you might be looking for an excuse.
Well, you know, red team wins, unfortunately, so...
So, if you want to say anything about it, that's fine, but I would now move on to what that means for me in terms of expectations for Riot Fighting.
Yeah, no, like that's fine, yeah. No, sorry, I could talk a lot more. I'd like to ask you a lot more, but let's move on.
We're already going for a while, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to keep these short, but oh well. So, I just put down a couple of bullet points, right? The first one would be solid tech, which goes without saying, right? Second one would be really good online. And this is something that I think fighting games, it's kind of funny because, you know, of all the drama that's been happening over online Evo. But having a fighting game with really good online matchmaking and online features, I think that alone is pretty important and interesting.
Oh,
right?
yes,
Suddenly you have another game where you're like, oh wow, I can actually play this over the internet without it being completely unplayable competitively. It's just, this is, and I'll go as far as saying in the past, Riot doesn't necessarily have the reputation for having like super stable servers or whatever. I honestly don't have the know-how to tell how hard it is or how easy to keep a service like League of Legends always online and working, right? I have no clue. From what I can tell, it's pretty hard because it's huge, but there are certainly still consistent like downtimes with, you know, any kind of matchmaking or networking issues in League today after 10 years. But this could just be the issues of, you know, how internet works. For the most part, though, what is interesting is that Riot actually tries to get preferential routing from ISPs for their game servers. So if you look at your ping, usually you'll have a better ping to like a Riot game than to like a regular other video game that you play online, simply because you get preferential routing through some ISPs. This is kind of, I think, going a step further than most game companies, right? And this gives me a bit more faith in them being able to execute good online. with their fighting game as well. But of course, since connections are such fickle things, the average online experience will still have laggers and AFKers and disconnectors. I would argue most of this is because of client-side stuff. Because as we both know, there's just a lot of people playing games on really bad connections.
Yeah,
there's nothing you can ever do about this.
Well, a lot of it's to matchmaking as well, of course, and how like the opponents that you get put against. Because like I played someone from Brazil earlier today, and actually it was pretty good. Like, I mean, at the moment, like your best-in-class online experiences in fighting games are stuff like Skullgirls, Phantasy Strike, Killer Instinct,
Yes.
maybe Mortal Kombat. I'm not sure on that one at the moment, but those are definitely the top three that I see, and that's not just from me. That's like continually I see those names, like in these discussions, and of course, part of the team that Riot bought anyway is the guys that invented GGPO. So. I definitely agree. Like, there's no doubt it's going to be as good as it can be in terms of the online things.
And this is a big deal. That's also.
Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, I do think it's already if you enjoy any of those titles I've already mentioned, like you're already good though. Like you really don't have much to complain about right now.
Sure.
As long as you pick and choose, right, the good ones.
I mean, the issue comes, and we've had this argument before about Fantasy Strike as well, right? The issue comes with, is the community large enough to support like a good online matchmaking and a good experience playing at different times of the day. And what I would argue is, even if you're a fan of the good netcode games that that are also have good designs, right? That are fun to play and not bothersome or annoying. They also need to be big enough for you to, be able to, enjoy your time mastering the game and playing the game.
I mean, I've had a big struggle
really
with that. In fighting games in the past in particular, I've had a huge struggle with that.
Exactly.
Like, Dive Kick, for example, theoretically has good netcode, right? But if you can't, the only person I can play against is on the far side of the States. Like, it still was garbage to play
it's
online.
It's just useless, right? It doesn't help you at all.
Also had none of the... There's other features, of course, that come with that because it's... Like Phantasy Strike, you can play single player, you can play in practice mode, you can watch tutorials, you can basically do everything in the game whilst queuing for a match. So you can do other stuff. Like whereas other older games like Dive Kick, you couldn't do anything. You just sat there waiting for a match, and you can't even play anything else. It's like
honestly, this is something that I would really hope they do for Project L, like this particular thing where you can queue and do other stuff. But now that I think about it, I'm torn. I don't think they'll do it, but this is something that it really should have. You just reminded me of this. This would be on my wish list, but I'm totally not expecting it, which is a bit sad because that's a good little like innovation, a good little change.
Well, do they have any single player content in any of their games?
Not really, right?
Yeah, so, maybe training modes and things like that. You mentioned the shooter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you can do is. In Valorant, I think you can stay in your lobby where you might be sitting, chatting to each other over the in-game voice chat, which is great, by the way. You can actually go into the training mode while you're still in the lobby, and as soon as like a friend joins, you can just quit the training mode and immediately queue up. It's possible you can even go into the training mode while you're queued, but I don't think so. They kind of have a little bit of this, but not really. I don't think they'll have it, honestly, but this would be on my wish list for sure.
Okay.
Third bullet point would be lame but clean art design. We already spoke about this. It's just going to be the League of Legends heroes, which are okay, right? They're not super interesting, not terrible. They're pretty much just middle of the pack. It's going to be free to play, which is a big one, especially for a later point where I also wrote a large player base to fill the queues. It's going to be both of that, and they go together, right? Because it's going to be free to play, it's going to be accessible, and because it's going to be free to play and accessible, it's going to have a lot of players, which is super important. I think this is really, really, really big.
Yeah, I agree. So are all the other titles? Is everything they've done free to play?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, I thought so, but I wasn't 100% certain, especially
no.
on the shooter and things like that. Okay, so you think they're utterly committed to that model because it will be interesting because I mean,
there's no way it's free to play.
How do you think? So I know you've talked about your next point were going to be unlockable characters and things like that, and obviously you said in each of these games there's like one thing you pay for. So you think you're going to have like a limited set of characters that you can play for free?
Exactly like Valorant. I think there's like 9 or 10 heroes in Valorant, and you have 5 for free. So even if you buy not a single one, you always have one to play because you can't have duplicates on the same team, and it's a team of 5 players. And the other 5 or 6 you have to unlock. I think you get 2 more or less for free, kind of by like playing through a tutorial part. It's not a tutorial in reality. You play like 10 games, but you unlock the first 2 way quicker than the following ones, and then you have to grind like 10 to 20 hours per unlock or something. And
But
it's
you
gonna
can
be
buy
almost,
them.
You can buy them
Yeah.
for $10 or so. Yeah, and it's probably going to be the same for the fighting game. There's almost no doubt in my mind it's going to work that way. It would be crazy if they went pay to play for some reason, but I don't really see it. Not based on how they've done stuff in the past. It's actually interesting. It's an interesting point because I spoke to a different friend of mine, and we talked about monetization of Runeterra, right? Because it's so incredibly generous. And he told, I basically said it was great. It was a big win for the consumer, right? And he told me that he couldn't even see the game doing well because of how cheap it was, right? Because of how, like, I mean, I have maybe half the cards or more unlocked, and I'm a super casual player, and all I did was pay like $5 for a starter bundle that gave me like 66 cards for $5, right?
Right.
And he has like pretty much all the cards. He plays a bunch more. He has all the cards, and he never paid a dime.
Well, here's the thing, though. But I think Riot is so big, and obviously they've got so much money to already
That's
to
what
fund
I
these
said.
things.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're playing a long game here? That
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
yeah, and so they're quite
100%.
happy to be almost like a disruptive thing, and maybe like you say, they're not aiming to kind of crush all the market and be the number one title in that market, but slowly over time they can basically undercut everyone else on price as well as like these other factors.
They make really good or maybe the best game of the genre, and it doesn't cost you anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this sounds like a really good business model going forward, because people are going to get tired of League, right? They're going to want to play like something else. And if they're going to play card games, like, honestly, there's a really good argument to be made to play Runeterra over almost anything except maybe the Magic online version now, right? Because Magic's still Magic, and in terms of depth, it's still kind of unbeatable. But that's really all that it has over Runeterra.
It's different when you're
else,
playing in real life cards as well versus like online.
I'm talking about the online version, online version of Magic. And of course, if you play real life cards, it's completely different entirely. Yeah.
Just so on the same point then. So I guess at the moment, I mean, as there's the over time factor as well. So they've obviously released more and more champions in League right over time.
Yes.
And then
League is pretty inaccessible now for a new player. It takes a long time to unlock like all the heroes, a really long time.
So do you think that you have the same expectation? Has that already started to happen in their other titles?
I guess. I think with the way they do stuff, which is give you a lot of stuff for free, but keep adding a lot. So there's new stuff to get often, even if you're an active player. That obviously means that if you never played and suddenly start playing when the game's already mature, there's going to be a lot more stuff, a bigger hurdle for you to get through to unlock stuff. But, I mean, there are some mitigating factors, right? Like, in League of Legends, characters get cheaper the older they get, and it's just based on, like, a moving row, right? Like, the newest champions comes out, the oldest one that didn't drop to a price tier gets down a price tier, and so on and so forth. And there's a couple of price tiers. It doesn't work that well in League because of how ridiculously long it takes to unlock stuff in League. But in Runeterra, even 2 years from now, when there's a lot more cards, you're going to be playing a deck of 30 cards. And unlocking any particular deck of 30 cards is always going to be super fast in Runeterra, just because of how quickly you get stuff.
Right, okay.
And
I mean, obviously they could completely pivot and change these things, but the way you see it going like this...
It's just not really likely. I don't really see it. Like,
no, okay.
That would be it. I mean, imagine. That would be the fucking outrage on the internet.
The bait and switch from Riot in terms of the whole monetization model. But that's good, though. But but still, I still think they're trying to get in then, trying to, I guess, undercut the competition in a way. Like,
well, I mean, they're trying to make the best product, which, since they're in such a good position in terms of their company, right? They have so much money and good resources and good know-how. It's easy for them, right? They can just make Counter-Strike, except maybe slightly more accessible. And I'm gonna get hate for saying better, but like there's clearly some aspects to Counter-Strike that didn't get with the times, right? CS:GO is somewhat modern, I guess, but still it's getting old. And for the most part, there are some things that you could change about the gameplay that arguably only make it more interesting.
Yes.
And if you do that and market it for free and give people a lot for their investment in terms of money or time, were they to switch away from what they played previously, then ultimately the more everybody you get on board is gonna want to stay because of their account value, right? Like they'll start to unlock stuff, they'll start to enjoy the game. They know Riot is going to give them more content constantly, right? Which keeps the people happy that play a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, a lot of people are bound to not go back and just stick with Riot Games. And then they might try some League or some Teamfight Tactics or whatever. There's, the focus on accessibility probably facilitates a lot of people switching titles. I'm 99% certain that a big part of Valorant's player base is League players that never really played a shooter, that just figured they'd give it a try.
Right.
And I think that works well, because as long as the experience is enjoyable, even for a complete noob, which is a big focus of their designs, they can convert players pretty well, right?
Yeah, it's something I talked about a lot before. That was how they've got the whole big market player base, if you like, of their existing players of Riot Games, and then plus they're trying to attract other players within that genre that they're aiming for. The interesting though, when you, I don't like to use the word casual players too much because it's a pretty loaded term, but like let's for that just call it that as a shorthand, right? So your casual player base of fighting games who typically would only play really single player content, like, and maybe have a few matches online, but essentially, like I say, your average buyer of Mortal Kombat, right? They're there for the story and the graphics, and it's essentially like it's a pretty big like solo experience in something like that.
I guess, yeah.
You don't think they're going to aim for that market at all by the sounds of it? No, okay.
I don't think so. Of course they could, but I don't really see it happening. They already have like. Do they have a single player experience lined up? I think there is. Like, clearly their strengths, right, are creating good competitive multiplayer games, right? That's their strength. And I'm pretty sure that they intend to take advantage of it. I think they have one title. There's like an MMO / action RPG that they want to make that got announced, and maybe like a single player experience, an RPG or of the likes. I think of all the games they announced, a single one is supposed to be single player. And from what I can tell, the ones that they've pushed out now have such a strong focus on competitive play. I cannot imagine that they would go for a big single player / casual design for Project L. I really don't think so.
And that's fine for me. Just it's interesting when you talk about like keeping with the design that works from existing games. But like
because
changing
fighting games are so all over the place. This is also what makes it hard for me to predict what exactly the gameplay is going to look like. That's why all those things that I predict about the game are mostly related to features, presentation, and monetization, and not necessarily to design. I have no idea what they're going to go with. I'm pretty convinced it's going to be a somewhat clean version. Not like 5 different super meters or whatever, and no like 30 hit combos that last 30 seconds where one player just gets to watch. I'm almost certain that there's not going to be any of this.
Okay, so I know we joked in the past that I was kind of pessimistically expecting a bit of a Rising Thunder style fighting game still. Which does have some of those features you just mentioned, by the way, like very, very, very long, complicated one-frame link combo strings. It basically worked exactly like Street Fighter 4, if not harder on the frame timing. But
in their other games, they have a very similar to David Sirlin approach to execution. They don't want to make stuff hard for the sake of it being hard to execute. That's not their style.
Okay,
I don't think they would make a fighting game where you had to do one frame links. I just don't think so.
Okay.
Even if Rising Thunder had that, I don't know too much about Rising Thunder. Sadly, yeah. I played it a little bit, but I'm almost certain it's going to have like 1 or at most 2 super bars, right? It's probably going to have combos that you have to practice, like in Fantasy Strike, but I don't think it's going to get too crazy, and I don't believe we're going to have like 360 motions, Dragon Punch motions. I don't think it's going to have one frame links. It's going to have almost none of that. I'm pretty sure. It's a genre that is kind of hard to predict, though. So in terms of design of the actual game, I'm really not sure. Right? It's just I have
Yeah.
a strong feeling based on their design philosophy of all their existing games that having something like that would just not fit.
Okay. Because I know something else we wanted to get onto. I know I'm kind of interjecting through your points about your
It's fine.
expectations, but we'll get there anyway. Don't worry. But like the history of fighting games, obviously, like you say, it's been such a long history from like your earliest arcade games and things like that, and it really. So one of the things is obviously the single player experience, which they're gonna, by the sounds of it, you kind of expect that'll be cut completely, like for at least.
Maybe not completely, but I don't think it's going to have like a Mortal Kombat-esque like storyline or whatever. It
Right.
might
I
have
mean,
it's probably going to be in the form of tutorials again, just like in Runeterra, where you have some like themed tutorial stuff to explain you the mechanics. I think the fighting game might have a similar thing where you get a little bit of story and some lore sprinkled in while they teach you the game. But
right.
after that, it's probably going to have just a really good practice mode, and then it's going to have online multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they can if they since we actually know they are using League of Legends characters in the fighting game, right? Because
Yes.
the screens that have been released and things are League of Legends characters, I believe.
Yes, they are.
Not that I recognise them at all, but
They are.
but yeah, so they've got that, and I guess they've already got a lot of lore and things like that anyway that they can just essentially crib
It's a
from,
big,
and it's like
big focus of them expanding the lore. That's what they tried to do with Runeterra as well, right? Building
Okay.
the world. It's again the lore is just it's not
Yeah.
it's not anything like super
groundbreaking.
crazy, but a lot of people still appreciate it nonetheless. Of course, the standards of the people they're marketing to, they're selling to, is not super high. So if you just tell them their favorite. Just give them some, interesting snippets on their like favorite League of Legends champion in Runeterra. They're gonna be happy, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
kind
fine.
of what they're trying to do.
I guess
And
that's the same thing as well with the expectations for like again classically Street Fighter Five got kind of bombed for having like really weak single player content on launch, but since this is a whole different thing, it's free to play, it's aimed at competitive players only really in a way, and it's aimed at existing league players. They don't really have those same expectations, I guess. Like they're
mean,
almost free from that legacy. Yeah.
I don't think Riot Games ever cared about reviews. I think like League and some of their games have terrible reviews on Metacritic and nobody gives a shit.
Fair enough. Okay. Um,
I mean, clearly
Yeah.
nobody gives a shit, right?
Yeah, I'll just talk since we got onto mechanics and things a bit. I agree with you. Like, it's really, really, really hard to tell what they're going to do because fighting games vary so much. And it's interesting though because I think like you started out with games like Street Fighter One, and then obviously Street Fighter Two was essentially the game that kickstarted the whole genre, and it becoming like big, yeah, as a competitive gaming scene. And then you got like generally you got through time just adding more and more and more mechanics, right?
Exactly.
And it just becomes more and more complex, more difficult, more inaccessible for new players to get in touch with everything and really understand these games. Although it's not, it has sort of reached a peak, I feel, and it's only in the recent years. I mean, you could still argue though, but even
taking away bars again, right?
they have started taking
bars,
things away. I mean, there always has been a bit of a bit of back and forth. It's like, well, Street Fighter 3 had parry mechanics, but Street Fighter 4 didn't. Like, like it's not like they've always added, and they have always taken some things away.
Replacement with the focus, right?
But it feels like they've kind of reached a peak, and only now you're starting to see a number of titles like Power Rangers, Battle for the Grid, and Fantasy Strike, and things like that, where they're actually pulling back a bit on that and going, hang on a minute, right? There's a whole gamut of taste here, or maybe even Smash as well, like if you want to class that in the same genre. There's a whole wide field of taste in fighting games, of styles, of ways, of like different styles of mechanics that all have been proven that they can work well as a competitive game, right? And so this is part of I guess my worry when you talk about them not being fairly conservative with the way they are going to design this game.
Yes.
I still think the majority of the current fighting game scene, they still tend to want these long combo-based games, right? So if you if you look at the criticism of like a lot of the top players at Street Fighter Five, and they're saying, "Oh, I can't express myself because I haven't got long combos to do,"
Yeah,
right? And even though they've put in like some characters that have really complicated combos, so they've kind of gone with the whole, well, we're going to have a spread of characters, some of which are more simple and some of which are more complicated. Not been completely successful at that, in my opinion, but okay, it was a good attempt to do that, especially early on in the early days of Street Fighter Five.
yes,
But
I heard about that actually.
yeah, so my concern is that if they kind of pander to that existing fighting game player base, that this won't be to my personal taste in fighting games, because I really appreciate the classics like Street Fighter 2, and I really appreciate these newer games that are actually starting to aim closer to where Street Fighter 2 was in terms of executional complexity and overall complexity in a way, but obviously without sacrificing competitive depth and things like that. So I just don't know. And again, Rising Thunder gives me a big cause for concern. Like them being conservative, it's like I would almost rather they ignored the prevailing views within the fighting game scene.
Of course,
right?
Everybody would like that, right? Like, and by everybody, I mean, like people that don't like what is already
Don't play
there,
fighting games, right? Yeah.
yeah, or people that don't play fighting games, right? Of course, but here's the thing, right? I'm not worried about this because their philosophy in the past has always been to take needless complexity away and make stuff accessible. So
Okay.
why would they not start with the 30-hit combos, one frame link, difficult executions? It would just not make any sense.
Well,
And
it kind of would
already-
if you wanted to appeal to that existing player base, though, right? If
No,
that
but
was
they
your
don't-
main
they
goal.
don't, right? Like they took a ton of mechanics out of Dota that
Mhm.
people considered really important that just added like almost useless, not completely. It always adds depth to have a bit more complexity, almost always, right? But they were super not afraid to take away a lot of those needless complex things from Dota and from other titles, like in Counter-Strike as well, right? From Counter-Strike to Valorant, the Counter-Strike people have the exact same thing to say about Valorant as the old school fighting game people have to say about the new
Right.
Street Fighter or Fantasy Strike. So why would it be any different with a fighting game?
Okay.
There's a pretty good reason to think that they would not pander to, like, they will pander to the old fighting game players by making the fighting game very competitively oriented, right?
Yes.
They
okay,
won't make
yeah.
it a single player experience, so the people that want to go to Evo and win the championship, like, they don't care about single player, so they're not going to put in a single player. But here's the thing, all the fake people out there that really just enjoy dunking on noobs and don't actually enjoy being challenged and just hide themselves behind complex mechanics, those are going to be unhappy because they're not really the big competitors they think they are, and they're going to get a
okay.
wake-up call because they're not going to design the game that way, right?
That's good.
They focus on interactivity, right? So they're not going to make one player watch for 45 seconds while the other guy does a combo. Like, they already don't remove stuff like that in League and in Runeterra and stuff, right?
Okay,
They have that. This is something that they're already doing. There's no reason to believe that they would suddenly stop with the fighting game. And they have a strong focus on accessibility. So they're going to make a fighting game that people that don't play fighting games might want to try, which I guess now that I hear myself talk about this, it sounds like they're going to make a Fantasy Strike, right? Which would be cool. But, of course, they might keep some aspects that just make it very not Fantasy Strike-esque after all. But
I mean, they
like,
was
most of those things you need to change if you want non-fighting game players to start playing fighting games.
Yeah,
Most
exactly.
of those things
like,
just need to go. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
no, the complex motions and things. Especially that's like number one thing, which of course Rising Thunder did away with, but then it added in these ridiculously hard like single button press combos and then all kinds of really complicated things happening on the screen. So it's actually like I found it harder to execute, way harder to execute stuff in Rising Thunder.
Yeah, I never got that far in
than
Rising Thunder.
than even like Street Fighter 5. So I couldn't play that competitively. I hope you're right. You've given me a lot of a lot of more, perhaps more hopeful outlook though, with your knowledge of how they
Yeah, I
do these
mean,
things. So
the reason I've always engaged with you saying these things was because I always had the impression you were overly ignorant of what Riot's been trying to do, right? Like League has had a pretty rough history in terms of competitive accessibility, right? When I started playing, I was quite frustrated. I came just fresh off the press from playing like a Street Fighter and reading Playing to Win, and I was pretty frustrated. I couldn't unlock the runes or like characters I wanted to try because I just hadn't grinded enough, right? And that was back in 2010, 2011, and fast forward to today, where League probably has the biggest wall to grind through before you can access like the competitive ladder. But generally speaking, it's become a lot more accessible in terms of stuff that impacts gameplay. If you presuppose that characters are balanced, so you're not really disadvantaged by having only a couple of characters that you like to play, and everything else being equal, there's nothing else that gives you an advantage, right? The new
yeah,
mode
yeah.
system doesn't give you like you'll start the game just like the super pro that just retired because his body just couldn't take sitting around anymore. So
That's cool. That's cool.
it should be a lot better. And yeah, I mean the next bullet point was also relating to this cosmetic microtransactions that give no advantage in gameplay. This
Yeah.
is going to be in the game 100%. They're going to put skins in there, and they're going to try their best, their hardest to make it so that you won't have an advantage for buying a skin. You'll be able to buy a new character, and if that new character is OP, it's going to be it's going to be an
Technically an
investment in your laddering until 2 or 3 weeks later where they patch the thing. And this is this comes further down the list, but I think it's really relevant. I feel like from the outside, it seems like fighting games have never been able to enjoy like rapid patching, which is really really cool for like emerging competitive games. It's a bit of battle of principles where a purist would say you shouldn't change things, just let the metagame settle, it will sort itself out, right? Like people will play the strongest character, and then people will learn how to deal with the strongest character. But ultimately, what I see in reality is, the like 2000, what was that, 16, 15 Street Fighter Akuma mirror matches, where one guy just won after he got a knockdown, and that was just really boring. And
I think it's a little bit further back than that, but yeah.
Yeah, or even further back then. But like, I never thought that was particularly interesting. Of course, it's fun to root for the low tier. Like, what was that guy with the knee that made it to finals? Something with a B.
Bonchan?
It was called something B.
Oh yes, sorry, yes.
I forgot his name.
He's changed his name because he doesn't use that title anymore, so it's really hard. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, no, there's definitely been the low tier warriors and things like that in fighting games. No, that's interesting though. There was the only case where this happened frequently. There was one of the Mortal Kombat games got a bit of flack from that sort of old school fighting game mentality because they did start to do a lot of patches.
Yeah.
So yeah, like.
From what I can tell, it really keeps the game fresh, especially for the super competitive player.
Street Fighter 5 has been patching, like, usually twice a year.
Twice a year is like nothing what Riot does, right?
Yeah.
It's like not even fucking close. It's like worlds apart. Like you don't realize this until you experience it, right? Like the feeling of being on the ladder. I mean, like, this guy memed on me again because, this card or this character is just like a bit too strong right now. Like, we're pretty evenly skilled, and he just kind of one-handedly because his piece is just really strong.
Yeah.
And then, like 2 weeks later, it just gets weakened into like either useless or reasonable state. So it's balancing is a really difficult process, and especially on the very high level these games are being played, a small nerf might mean it's already the worst again, right? But it happens, and it keeps the game a lot more fresh for the players that are really committed. Because instead of playing against the same stuff over and over, it changes up, and your preferred strategy might have its time of the day at some point.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I've experienced that a little bit in Heroes of the Storm, where you would get a new character released who sometimes was like clearly like not the greatest balance on release. Sometimes in both directions, like sometimes they were just way too weak or whatever. But yeah, I know what you mean. I suppose, I guess that there are good and bad sides to that. I think I think, but you tend to fall on the positives, I
I
guess, yeah?
think it's overwhelmingly good. And the only time, like, what a lot of people, I think the old school argument of, well, you need to give the meta time to settle, it has some truth to it, right? It's impossible to predict what, like, 20 bajillion hours of game time are going to do with a certain meta game if you just let it go, right? It's possible that at some point at the very end, something is going to change and there's a revolution, right? It's just not that likely. And with the scope that Riot Games are being played at, people don't understand how much of these games is being played, right? There's a lot of game hours being put in, even in the very short time between 2 or 4 weeks between patches. So usually, there's first of all there's good data on what's actually happening in games available to them, and second of all, there's a lot of iterations being run, even with rapid changes in the balancing to make sure that the metagame actually has time to evolve. And as the games mature, their approach to balancing becomes more subtle as well. They change to a model in League where back in the day they would make some pretty big balance changes, even like every 2 weeks back in 2012. Nowadays they do like one really big large impact, like big change at the start of the competitive season, and then they only do small tweaking over the season. And they do this because the game's already pretty balanced. All the characters are pretty damn close to each other in win rate and in competitive viability. And I think this just has to be said. Riot Games are just generally pretty damn well balanced. If you even if you don't like the fast patching, just the overall result, if you look at the game over a period of 6 to 12 months, compared to any other competitive video game, and you'll just have to arrive at the conclusion that it's really well balanced, right? Like it's.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be another game besides maybe Fantasy Strike that can rival the fighting game in terms of balance after give it like 6 months or so.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Simply because of how good they are at balancing. They
Yeah,
really take
I mean, they've got a lot more, and as you say, they're just a huge amount of players, things like that. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on that, like whether you should or shouldn't do that. I generally think I'd probably more agree with you. Like, I'm quite happy to make small changes a lot of the time. I know for Fantasy Strike's case, we're waiting on a patch that will affect the balance of the game, and that's been delayed. So actually, well, the reason it's been delayed, I'm going to skip onto one of your points for you, actually, if that's okay. Which you think this game will only come out on PC?
I think so, yeah.
Because that's actually a massive factor. So the thing that's been delaying Fantasy Strike's ability to patch, right, like massively, is Nintendo and Sony. It's the console people have like so many hoops and things you've got to jump through to release a patch. Whereas on Steam they can do it in 2 seconds, right? Like if they were only on PC, they could patch this game and they do on the Patreon build, right? They can patch that like every week or whatever they want to do,
Fantasy
right?
Strike it is, right? Yeah.
Fantasy Strike, yeah. So, but that, I mean, this would be a problem. I mean, I'm guessing like a huge company, just through sheer weight of financial figures and things, will get some fast track stuff, and they're probably much more able to do this than a small indie developer. But still, the console people would really cause an issue with this, I reckon. So, I mean, Street Fighter V patches fairly frequently, I guess, but they've got the whole. They don't go through the some of it does, some of it goes through the console hierarchy. I mean, I play it on PC, so I don't see all of that anyway. But some of it goes through the Steam patch process. But then there's also an in-game internal patch process. It's kind of like a double thing that has to work, and I'm guessing that helps them get around what Steam or the console holders let them do with terms of patches by having their own in-game patch system. Yeah, but that's a whole load of hassle. That if this game is only PC, it's obviously great for me since I'm a PC gamer. But like again, that would be actually quite a significant change to the way fighting games have generally worked.
I agree, and I'm pretty confident in this. Riot's audience is PC gamers, right?
Right.
And Riot does their own clients, right? They like having the control, so it's unlikely that they'll throw away a lot of agency to Nintendo or Sony or whatever.
Yeah.
Whoever owns the console. So chances are pretty good it's going to be PC only. And because it's PC only, and because fighting games have a big history of like controller support and everything, it's probably going to be able to be playable on keyboard, on gamepad, on fight stick, and everything.
Yeah.
Similar to Fantasy Strike. The chances are pretty damn good.
That's really interesting. There's something I wondered about actually alongside that. So as soon as you are looking at PC-based games and you're moving away from this console sort of sat side by side on one TV screen, even if you like, and it's something that Rise Thunder had as well. They had mechanics that weren't that were like based on your screen. So like you'd have a meter that
I
only
know
you
what
could
you mean,
see
yeah.
on your
Yeah.
local screen, and your opponent couldn't see that. But obviously, you couldn't make that work on a side by side console system, right? In the traditional way fighting games were played, like at an offline tournament. So, but you could do that on the way traditionally like PC tournaments run, right? Because everyone has their own PC and their own screen, and they're running on a LAN. And all you need to do is face the PCs against it, so you can't see the opponent's screen, and you're gold, right? Like you could still run those mechanics on a LAN, an offline event. Yeah, it doesn't force you to have to play this online.
I agree that this is like a really interesting design space. I'd bet my ass though that this is the one of the aspects where they'll stay true to the original and keep the fighting game the way they've always been, one screen with all the information for both players that everybody can look at. I'm
Okay.
almost certain that they won't do like the individual screen stuff simply because they want people to be able to put up one big screen at Evo, look at it, and everybody else look at the same screen and play that game.
I got you. Okay. Because I mean
think
that
this
is
would be an aspect to preserve. Like
right.
this would be where you could go really bold and interesting, but that's exactly what I think they won't do.
They won't do that. Okay, fair enough. I mean,
yeah,
that would
in my opinion.
remove one of the strengths of fighting games, like you say, the whole spectator aspect of
Exactly.
everyone can see the same thing. Whereas if you're watching,
This is something you would want to preserve, right? And I'm almost certain that they will try hard to preserve that, because this is what makes fighting games unique, right? This is exactly why they keep a bunch of the stuff that's like, for example, the way you draw cards in Magic, right? Like just from the top. You don't really need to do it like this, but because you do it like this in real life, they just do it like this in the card game as well, like in the digital card game. And even though you could do a lot more interesting stuff with it, they just don't, because it makes sense, right? From just from an intuitivity standpoint, to just draw from the top and just do it one at a time or whatever.
Okay.
Maybe not the strongest example, I guess, but
I know what you mean. I have actually played a card game where you did have like face up hands, and it was a digital card game. But anyway.
yeah. Like both players sitting across from each other, both having their hand be hidden from the opponent and their deck be hidden from everybody, and drawing from the top. But you could challenge most of these things, and it could make for a really interesting game. But this is exactly the kind of stuff that they don't change to make you feel like you're still playing, a custom like Magic, like back in the day, or like a fighting game, right? This is the stuff that they want to keep the same because they want to keep the essence, right? They don't really want the like convoluted stuff too much. I mean, sometimes they just can't help it. Like Valorant has a bunch of mechanics that are really that are hard. They're not apparent for new players. That are kind of important for the competitive part of the game. But for the most part, I think they're removing as much of the cluttered as they can, but keep what actually makes the genre interesting and unique. So I'd bet my ass that it's PC only. I'd bet my ass that it's one screen with all the information, and I also think it's going to feature a lot of support for hardware. Probably even keyboard inputs. I'm pretty sure they're going to make it so that you can play with the keyboard.
I think that's great. Do you think they wouldn't involve a mouse though? Surely.
I doubt it.
Right.
Because again, that's challenging it too much.
Okay. No, I think that sounds fine. I mean, Fantasy Strike's proven you can do that really, really, really well. And it also lends itself towards going down the more simple control schemes that we personally prefer generally. So that sounds all very promising from at least from my taste point of view.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is, if you take all these things together, even if the game is just not that great, it's already a great fighting, right? Because the features that modern fighting games offer are pretty lackluster.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
really a fighting game where you, like Fantasy Strike kind of has it all, but it doesn't have the big developer behind it and the big player base, right?
Yeah.
But besides Fantasy Strike, there's very few games where you're like, well, this has basically everything, so I really want to play it. So even if the retail fighting game is, not the most interesting with character diversity, not the most interesting in terms of gameplay, just based on the features and based on the right design philosophy, which you can observe in their existing games and the way they approach the games that they do develop, there's a really, I think you can very reasonably assume all these points that we talked about it are most likely going to be there, which all combined, I mean, this is going to be a fighting game I definitely want to play, right?
Fair enough. Okay.
Because I can,
yeah.
I can queue up in the middle of the night and get like thousands of people to play against.
I mean, if it, to be fair, I almost said like, well, if it's free to play, I'll give it a go. But actually, if I, because I'm so experienced in fighting games, if I see dozens of mechanics that I know I don't like, even free to play won't get me to try it. But specifically, this is a taste thing. I don't want to be too hard because I know Killer Instinct's got a lot of fans, and it's like it's in its own regard a very well-designed fighting game as well for what it's trying to do. But there's so many mechanics in that game that are not what I enjoy. Right? It's such, I mean, Killer Instinct was the original super long combo game, right? There's like when that first released, that was the most crazy longest
Really, I thought
combos.
it was like Mario vs. Capcom or something.
Well, it came out before that though. I'm saying when it first released, it was was like an absolute standout, and then they introduced the combo breaker mechanic. So that does you can argue there's some interactivity in it, but yeah,
it's super inelegant to do it that way.
yeah,
right? Like,
it's
you just put a band-aid fix to like
exactly my view as well. But yeah, so it kind of added to mechanics I didn't enjoy by making more mechanics I don't like either. So it was a kind of So for example, if this game was based around those kind of mechanics, like massive long combo strings, combo breakers, like Killer Instinct,
why would
I
it be,
instantly
though, right?
won't be interested in it. But as you've said, like don't worry,
There's
I have been
reason to
listening.
believe, I mean,
We don't think it'll be.
I'm gonna make you play that game, even if it's just for one night. There's literally nothing that needs to stop you because you could download this and play it. Like you could decide to play it. Half an hour later, you could already be playing it. So there's really no reason not to at least try. And also, after you tried Runeterra, you might have a bit more faith in the company because again, they make good games, right? They have some. There's obviously always things that are questionable with a huge company like Riot, and especially now that they've been bought up by Tencent, you can say, I don't want to play their games because I don't support what's behind them, right? Or or I have issues with the monetization or whatever. But the way that they approach their game designs has grown a lot from 2010 when they first entered the industry, and compared to industry standard, which hasn't evolved that much, right?
Well, yeah, especially not in fighting games, as you've
especially
alluded to.
not in
Very
fighting
true.
games, but also elsewhere, right? Like, what did we have in FPS? We had the focus on team deathmatch, modern warfare, right? Putting the whole thing, putting the genre on the map again and making it a modern thing. Then we had battle royales, and that's it. Like that's all we've done in 10 years of FPS. So Riot is not doing anything new. But just by doing these things well, they make games that, at least compared to existing games, are definitely worth playing, right? Like if you like Counter-Strike Go or Counter-Strike in general, you should probably give Valorant a try. And the same is true for card games. You like CCGs, or even if you just like customizable, not collectible card games like Yomi players, because of how easy it is to access the cards in Runeterra, you might still want to try it because, let's be real, I'm already at the point where I don't. There's a million more decks I could build, but I don't really feel compelled to build them. If I want to play the game, I have the kind of decks that I enjoy playing already.
You're happy,
then I just play those, right? And since I'm not a competitive player, that's all I really need. I'm perfectly fine just being that way. And yeah, so. It's just, I don't know. I think you should give it a try. I think, because it's a Riot game, like there's going to be a lot of players just at least trying it out anyways. It's going to be free to play. It's going to be easy to pick up. so it's going to get a lot of player base early. And on what we can tell, on what we see today, there's no reason to believe it's going to be anything less than, probably one of the more stellar games in the fighting game genre, right?
Let's hope
Which
so,
I guess
anyway.
speaks less about, the Riot fighting game and more about modern fighting games. But I mean, however your view is on this, you can't really deny that the signs are there, right? Like, it's looking pretty good, I think.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, in terms of trying it out, it's interesting with the free to play because obviously the example if you gave me Runeterra, I did try Hearthstone and literally like uninstalled it within a few hours because I realised there was a load of things I did not like already, and it's like it came to a decision point. There's different modes of play in that and there was a kind of like a draft style play.
Yeah.
And I decided that was actually fun and worth pursuing, potentially, but I'd need to be like massively, because that was so hard to know everything about, because you literally needed to know every single card in the whole thing. Like, it was meant to be like the advanced stage, you go through the collecting and playing the normal game first, and then if you're really competitive and really good, you kind of play that mode potentially, yeah? If that was your taste.
I guess in terms of rewards, yeah, I think you get more for playing Arena. It used to be like that in Runeterra as well, but they changed it. But I think I'd say for most people, I think it's the other way around. They play Draft to get to know all the cards, because in Draft, in Constructed, you only see the same good cards, right? People build the best decks, so you get to see the best decks and the best cards, and none of the bad stuff. But if you play Draft, you'll be forced to put bad cards in your decks often. So you'll get to see a lot of different cards, and since Draft is also usually less competitive, you're more likely to get more time with the cards that are being played, see what they do, see how they interact, and learn. And usually there's not a big punishment for losing. The Draft in Runeterra lets you lose a game for every single win you get without ending your thingy. As long as you don't lose two in a row, you get to go for a pretty long time.
Continue
and
run.
It still limits you. Like, you can't just play Draft. You have to do some, resource collecting to be able to fuel it. But for the most part, I think most people use Draft to learn the game and then mature to constructed play, because that is the default competitive mode, right?
Oh, so it's okay. I mean,
it's been like this for Magic and Hearthstone as well, right? Constructed is how the winners are crowned, the best players.
I guess Magic's interesting, but yeah,
Magic has
had a lot
well,
actually,
course,
yeah. And sometimes it's seen as anyway. We're getting a little bit too much off topic there with card games.
Yeah, I've made my piece, but
let's run through. Well, I just want to make sure we've hit all your bullet points that that you've got down here as well. So you kind of expect. So we've talked about accessibility. We've talked about the design. You did think there might be some kind of juggle combos, but I feel like you've kind of like talked away from that now.
Yeah, I think I convinced myself that they wouldn't really, since they're big on interactivity, right? This is literally something that they've been addressing in multiple games, where they put out a patch note saying we want players to interact. We don't think uninteractive gameplay is fun or engaging. So based on that, it would be kind of a break from their principles to put in long juggle combos. So actually, I convinced myself that this is probably another thing.
It's an interesting one, because it's where their principles are, as I said, it's like different to the mainstream fighting game scene views, if you like. Yeah. So
I guess, yeah. And, I mean, honestly, the way they handle these games, like, I think Runeterra was just, they had a dude that they really trusted, had a good vision for a card game, and they just let him go ham. So if they pick the wrong person, it's possible that he's just going to disagree on, interactivity as a principle and just going to put long combos in the game. But again, I have a little bit of faith and say they tend to err on the reasonable side when it comes to core design decisions.
Okay.
And one thing we haven't touched on is the policing of players, which is a bit contested topic for sure. Yeah,
sorry, to come back to one more thing about the combat thing. Do you think they might vary it between characters? So just like we said about Street Fighter V. Do you think is that something you see in their other games, where there's like a bit of quite a range of executional demands?
Absolutely. And they embrace this in their design as well, right? They make a League character that is considerably more mechanical to play well, but they give them greater rewards for pulling off the insane plays because they want this excitement that it generates. And of course, very often a character that's more mechanical is also open to more counterplay because they focus on interactivity. So you have a character that where if he lands every single one of his shots, he's going to do way more damage than other characters. But since he needs to aim those shots manually, he needs to be really good to land them all, right? And once you consider that in order to land, the person that it's being aimed at can also influence how easy that person is to hit, right? He can predict when the shot is going to come and then quickly swerve to the right or to the left to dodge. At that point, immediately the reward for hitting those shots and doing above average damage makes it that the character is still not overpowered because the interaction is there, right? You can a character with a big execution burden, it also opens himself up to more counterplay, meaning that if a good player is there, if he's playing a good player against good players, they also have a say in how hard this character is going to perform, how hard is he going to carry, how well is he going to perform in a certain fight or engagement or whatever. And they do that in Valorant. They have agents that provide team utility and setup fights. They have agents that are about fragging, is what you call that, where you kill other players. And they're particularly good at that, right? That get that can heal themselves after engagement, that get abilities that help them 1v1 take somebody down that's holding an angle that they want to peek and stuff like that. So there's 100% going to be simpler characters or more crazy mechanical characters like Setsuki, like Fantasy Strike does as well. It's almost certainly going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I guess, I actually bringing up that example really makes it work again. Actually, it's still tricky to balance that, but as you've talked about, the constant balancing and patching gives them much more leeway to get that right. It's always a bit tricky because sometimes you make that high execution, high demand, high reward character, but then you feel like it's very easy
payoff
for
is not there.
Well, no, it's more easy for that to become. Oftentimes that becomes the high level player in the game, right? Because
they call this oppressive,
if maybe at lower levels, and this I definitely have seen this happen in MOBA games where a character's pretty weak at low skill levels, but then they become incredibly powerful at high skill levels. All the other way around as well. You get the other issue, which is possibly
what's funny?
even worse.
Since this is the stuff that I revel in, right? Because this is balancing, right? I love this topic and I just care about it a lot. It's interesting because this is a super interesting topic, right? How do you balance for different skill levels? Because obviously a character that has a really high burden on the mechanical skill of the players is just going to be better in the hands of an experienced player that has good mechanics than compared to a low skill casual player that doesn't play the game a lot and as a result will click less accurately and less quickly and so on and so forth. So how do you do that? It's ultimately a goal conflict, if that's a thing, a word in English. You can't do both, right? It's impossible to make him perfectly balanced in low skill and in high skill matches because of how different the players are piloting the piece, the character. So ultimately what you want to do is, and I think Serlin does this as well in his approach to Fantasy Strike, is balance it as well as you can. Try wherever you can to give the character some guaranteed payoff that the bad is probably a bit of a loaded word, but the less experienced characters can take advantage of, that will always be there, right? But still keep in the elements that allow a really skilled, high intensity, competitive player to make the super great plays that make it into the halls of fame. So they've done that a ton in League because obviously a huge issue, right? Some characters just they do so much damage and run so fast, and the unorganized way low-skilled teams play the game just means they roll all over them, whereas in skilled players' games they get the crowd control on them and they die within 3 seconds, right? And the character is completely worthless in good players' games and super good in low-level games, and they do this all the time where they change certain aspects of the kit and of the mechanics of the piece to make it so that the bad players or the casual players have more guaranteed value, more guaranteed impact from their abilities, from the things that their character does in the game, whereas they give like the character more ways to combat the ways that the good player counter the way the
Yeah.
character tries the things the character tries to do, right?
I think that's actually easier in a fighting game anyway, and to some extent. So because
absolutely.
you haven't got so many different dynamics at work there when
Yeah.
you talk about team fight games. But yeah,
Since you only ever balance the matchup, right? That's a huge advantage of the fighting game.
yeah. Okay, so sorry. Anyway, policing of this is one of your points we haven't touched on at all. Was
I
the
mean, this
policing
was a
of-
really interesting topic. Like, I
Yeah.
could talk about this for ages, but it's something that I trust Riot to do pretty well, which is why I have a faith that it's going to be accessible enough without being boring to play, right? Like,
Yeah.
sorry.
So yeah, this is we're talking about like I don't like the term rage quitting because I don't think it often is about rage. I think it's often about cheating the game system because it doesn't account for it. so for like
Yeah, but that's the same
Yeah.
thing in terms of what they'll do to it, right?
Yeah, so they're going to have a quit you lose system. You haven't got to worry about teams, so that makes it a lot easier. AFKers, I mean, like, I guess that's not really a problem in fighting games because you can just easily...
Most of these are not an issue in fighting games, and as a result, it's probably going to see the least or almost the least amount of this. But I mean, from what I heard, it's just an issue that in fighting games, people that quit the match somehow do not get attributed a loss, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
people that disconnect or whatever.
It's happened in many fighting games that should know better,
yeah.
but the good ones don't have this problem, yeah.
Oh, good. It's great to hear that because, again, this is another thing that would be so obvious for any good game to have. It's
Yeah.
somehow like a lot of modern fighting games get it wrong, and Riot would only have just to put up the absolute least amount of effort and already have a huge advantage. But I guess not then. So
Well-
the modern fighting games do this pretty well.
No, not the AAA ones, but the one again. A lot of the games I mentioned earlier, the same ones that have the good online. So Fantasy Strike,
okay.
Killer Instinct, Skullgirls, I believe is fine as well. I don't know too much about that one, but yeah, in Fantasy Strike you can quit at any time, but you quit you lose, right? That's
Okay,
simple,
yeah.
and
And-
it has
yeah.
it has a server that, and if I mean, even if like both players disconnect, it still tries to figure out who disconnected first and things like
Yeah.
that. So like, there's a load of systems they've got to try and do this as best they possibly can. Like, can it possibly go wrong? Yeah, probably. And I mean, when you start to get into the realms of like, you know, like DOSing attacks on the server and ridiculous stuff like that, then yeah, I'm sure you could probably break it, right? But like, in terms of your average player with their average ability to, I mean, I guess one of the things that is a problem in fighting games, though, or could become a problem, is things like the infamous lag switches and harder. I don't know so many people that do this on PC. It seemed to be more of a console thing for some reason. But like you say, in placing bad connections or ways to monitor that kind of thing, I guess they have a reporting system in most of their games, don't they?
Yes, although it's like this report system is mostly automated stuff, so it's mostly for just addressing text chat, right? If people are like
Yeah.
bigoted or racist in chat or hateful, that usually gets taken care of pretty quickly. But it's extremely hard to police in-game behavior because almost any play can be declared just a mistake, right?
Yeah. I'm not
You
fine.
So it's and this is a huge point of contention in the league community as well, right? There's people that, since the good thing is fighting games don't have to deal with most of it because it's not a team game, right? But in all
Yeah.
these team games, you quickly have issues where some person gets fed up or like upset and they hold the game hostage, right? They're like, I'm gonna make sure you guys lose, and then just intentionally try to give their opponents advantages, right? This works just as well in Valorant as it does in League of Legends. It doesn't really have to be like an economical like money advantage by giving them kills or whatever. It works just as well in Valorant. So,
Yeah, of course.
So fighting games don't have to deal with this, which is great, which is also why it's probably going to see least of this. Runeterra has very little of this as well. Since you don't have an open chat with your opponent, right? You don't have a text box that you type in during the game that you use to talk to your opponent, and since you don't have voice chat with your opponent, there's very little that you really have to police, right? You have to police quitting the game, which they will absolutely do, right? If you just turn your connection off or rage quit the game, I'm 99% sure they'll make sure that you get a loss in your history and the other guy gets a win. And if you disconnect because your modem fucked up, it's probably the same thing, right? You'll have to eat the loss every time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What I'm curious about is whether they'll actually police people with really bad connections, because they kind of do this in League of Legends, where they won't ban you for having high ping or anything, but if you're somebody that has like an internet connection that is so unstable that you can disconnect for long enough periods of time and still reconnect after, right? But still, if you were gone for enough of the game, you will still get punished as if you just quit the game, at least in League of Legends, right? So since fighting games rounds are so much shorter and so much more sensible to ping, I could definitely see them trying something with ping stability, like trying to deny players from ranked queues if they have a ping that's too high. I think this is technically really hard to execute well, so chances are they might not, but they just went as far as installing like malware on every single computer that wants to play Valorant just to stop cheaters. So who knows how far they'll go, right? It's like
that's promise. I mean, there are some promising things going on this regard. Skullgirls on PC I think it's introduced like a jitter indicator, which is the instability of the ping. Yeah, so you can actually tell if someone's probably playing on Wi-Fi or they've got a connection that's varying drastically to you for whatever reason, mate. Obviously, I don't want to totally blame it on the player because it might just be down to your connection to them for some reason. But the term jitter has become a bit more popularized to show that kind of variability, and that's a real problem in fighting games because like.
Agreed.
Like I played a match in 250 seconds ping on Phantom Strike earlier against someone I believe in Brazil by the name, and it was actually fine because it was exactly stable. Like it literally was within 250 to 260 for the entire match. And yeah, there was some little bits of rollback at times, but I had no issues playing that match. Whereas I play lots of other players much better ping time to me, but because it's varying like within hundreds of like milliseconds up and down, it's really nasty to play. So that's a key thing for fighting games. So there are games already coming out with that kind of stuff. So I think that's a good possibility they'll do it. Yeah.
And I would love to see this, right? Because I mean, I've told you many times, I get super upset at having to play around with bad connection because it destroys the whole experience, right?
I agree.
I'm all for learning from my mistakes, but like if you already have to deal with the frustration of like. Since I don't play fighting games that routinely, I already have to deal with the core frustration of my brain and muscle memory not being where I want it to be. Right? I know he's going to jump at me, and I want to do the punch where he punches at the air, so I can anti-air him, and then my hands just don't do the wrong punch, and it's insanely frustrating, of course, because I knew what the play was, I just couldn't physically execute it, and then on top of that, I get a trade, like I get knocked down instead of trading because of some rollback stuff or some lag jitter. It's insanely frustrating, and it ruins the whole experience and really dampens my willingness to put more effort and time into it. So if they could do that, that would be great. That's another wish list thing for me. Mm-hmm. Who knows? I am really not confident in that prediction.
It'd be good. I think they'll do something. Anyway, so the last thing that we didn't really touch on at all was the way they do the online ranked ladder.
Yes.
The fact you've used the word ladder instantly tells me you've got some expectations here.
I mean, ladders are their thing, right? Ladders is the thing that they provide besides their organized professional league that they run for League of Legends. Ladders is the absolute number one thing that they always provide in all of their games, right? And a pretty big part of what I would even call the Riot philosophy is a ladder play.
Okay.
It actually drove me mad back in the day when I was convinced, competitive League of Legends was the greatest thing ever. I was upset at how adamant they were about promoting the ladder players. I would say the first generation of League of Legends players, in a lot of ways, it wasn't the same everywhere, and there were a lot of big exceptions. But a lot of the first League of Legends pros were actually just the top ladder players, right? And you could very much see League of Legends, the competitive metagame, evolve from pretty much just a ladder game with really good players to something completely different, right? Like today, back in the day, in Season 1 in 2010, if you would pick the best, highest ranked players on the ladder, of
Hmm.
like League of Legends ranked games and put them in a competitive match, it will not look that much differently from like a competitive game played on like DreamHack World Stage, which was pretty tiny back then, right? But
Right.
today, like if you took the best players from like online ladders and put them against any semi-competent team, without giving them any good way to organize, which there generally isn't in ranked ladder play, they would just get completely stomped, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
competitive play is so much further ahead of like the unorganized like solo play that is being promoted by the ranked ladder that there's just no comparison. And I'm actually kind of upset about this. I'm really glad that they are introducing Clash, this in-tournament, in-client tournament that you can play on the weekends now. That promotes, teams, players teaming up and getting on voice comms and being organized and actually playing the
Playing a
competitive.
team game. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and not playing just grinding the ladder. But this. I mean, I quit the competitive aspect of League because of that reason. I just couldn't get myself to grind the solo queue ladder, right? To just queue up alone with 4 randoms and just make the best of the situation. It was a very unsatisfying way to play the game for me because
I would
it
agree.
emphasizes, it emphasizes the aspects of the game that aren't interesting. Right? Whether you can dodge like a skill shot and hit your own, that's like the least interesting part of the game. That's oftentimes the only thing that really matters, right?
That's the thing that sways it towards, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you can see a great play opportunity, but unless everybody else on your team is on the same page, since you don't really have a good way of communicating with them, it doesn't really matter that you see this opportunity, and you might be an unconventional genius like Serlin writes in Playing to Win for actually seeing this opportunity, but it just doesn't matter
No.
in ladder play because nobody's ever going to be able to take advantage of it, right? So as a result, it just becomes very mechanical, right? You just grind a lot of games because ladders are always a numbers game. You just, with 51% win rate, you'll eventually be number one if you just play enough games, right?
Right.
And then it's very mechanical. So you just try to not die and get a lot of kills and make some reasonable decisions. And there's ways to game the system, but for the most part, it's a very dull way of taking the game seriously, playing the competitive mode.
That's
So
fair. But for fighting games, of course, you haven't got any of these issues,
it's
really.
way better, right? It's
So,
way better. The
This
ladder
is
is a
obviously
much
one of the
better way
reasons
to
why
do
I
this.
enjoy fighting games, is because I don't have to
Yeah.
deal with any of this stuff, right? So, but I mean, there has been some different styles of doing so ladder traditionally is just one gigantic leaderboard of everybody, right?
Yeah.
And in Street Fighter V you have that, but you do have like some breakdowns by country
Oh.
and region and things like that. Like,
I care so little about these things that I didn't even think of them. But yeah, of course, they'll have different tiers, and they'll probably have a highest tier, which is pretty visible to everybody, that has a fixed amount of players, most likely, like the challengers,
Okay.
the grandmasters, where everybody can see who's at the top, right? There's probably even going to be an in-game way to check this, or at least on the website. And yeah, and you're going to get rewards in every season based on the rank you reached in the last season. You're going to be able to display this to your friends, and there's going to be some healthy memes about the different tiers of play.
okay,
Yeah.
I mean that's essentially so. And you mentioned seasons as well. That's going to be one of my questions about how they do it, because again, Fantasy Strike is already doing all this stuff. So you've got the kind of rank mode where you
Yeah.
have like pseudo tournaments, and then you try tries to match against other people at the same point in the. I guess they don't go that far with any kind of tournament structure. But you said they're introducing
I hope
it.
they
yeah.
would. I hope
Like,
they will.
yeah.
Probably not, though. They might do incline tournaments in that as well. But since they're struggling a lot with doing this in League. So my guess would be that they probably want to do this in the other games as well. Maybe not Runeterra, but definitely Valorant and probably Project L as well. But since it's taking them so long to get it like running well in League, chances are that this is going to be like a thing of the future for now.
Cool. All right.
I can totally see them doing this in the future, which would be amazing, right?
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right then. So we're pretty much wrapping this up now. I just want to say thank you very much for giving me. I mean, I would definitely say you've encouraged me a lot. Like I've got a lot more of a positive viewpoint towards it now. I think from everything you've told me and their history with it and what they're doing with these other games, that's very promising. I think the key things that make me sort of believe you, other than the fact I trust you as a friend and like I know you've got to think a lot about these things and play all these games, actually is the PC only thing, right? And also cutting out the solo play aspects. You've immediately moved so far away from like what's seen as the core way of marketing and distributing a fighting game. Like
yeah, I get that. Yeah.
that I believe they then have the capacity to make these other things, and they have to make these other things work in the way that perhaps we want to see it work, right?
Indeed, that's ultimately my point, right? Like, it wouldn't make sense for them to make a bad fighting game with the way they've been doing things so far. It just doesn't, right? It's possible that they still might do so, but it just doesn't really make any sense. So reasonably, you would expect these things that I listed.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't want to use the word bad because like it's more of a taste thing. Like, do you prefer Street Fighter 2 style fighting game, or do you prefer something like Guilty Gear? Right, both of them can be good games. It's just one of them I feel is much more approachable for the majority of people out there, right?
You just answered the question, right? Since the Street Fighter 2 version is more approachable, it's infinitely more likely that the Riot fighting game is going to look more like this because accessibility is such a big focus.
Yeah, in which case it will be a massive change to the. I mean, people. It's funny how much like people in the fighting game scene sort of lament and cry about dumbing down games and what have you, and things like that. And it's like you've got no clue how complex this is. Like. I mean,
people that played fighting games for like 20 years, like,
I know.
Don't make it too easy. It's already so easy. It's like, well, you literally done nothing but played like this one genre of games, and you have like absolutely no perspective on this.
Yeah, and it really is crazy how the lack of perspective, and then again the people that can do the combos and things like that, but actually they've got they don't have like other skills. Like, they don't actually play the game at a high level. But they can do a combo, so they think it's fine. And I'm like, no,
they're not actually competitive.
No,
right? They're not interested in
you're not really interested in all this game has to offer because the fact, it's
you just want to style on some noobs because it makes you feel good, right? And this is fine, but it's just not really. It's generally not the kind of games Riot develops, which is, I think, kind of the reason why they lost some players in the past. That people just noticed that competitive games aren't for them, right?
Yeah,
in the big Riot League of Legends
which is fine as long as they can make this work and they can get enough players, and it sounds like they can. That sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the last thing they will fail at, is getting enough players.
Okay.
It's literally the one thing I'll guarantee you, that there's going to be plenty of players to play these games, and even if everything else is garbage. And who knows, right? Like they might go with conventional design, and it's just going to be a huge pile of dung.
I mean, it still could be very. I mean, like you say, it could be very successful and still not something that perhaps I'll enjoy or that maybe you'll enjoy, right? But it's like you say, it seems unlikely. It just seems unlikely that they can do that.
Based on what we know, I think you could be very very positive in your expectation for the game. And since it's the future, who knows what will happen? But the chances are really good we'll get a great game.
I've got measured hopes now. I've gone from complete pessimist to like.
Wow, that's
I'm gonna call it a 50-50 for now. I'd love to see it, but let's hope so.
50-50, either it's gonna be good or not.
Everything's a 50% chance, right? So there we go. All right, thank you very much, Jose. I will add this to the recording, and thanks for chatting it up through, explaining everything to me. It's been really, really insightful and really interesting.
And of course, if there's any follow-up on this, like if you think I made some false claims, or if you hear about anything that makes you distrustful again, or that you consider really bad, you can always bring it up again. I think I'm somewhat educated simply because I'm involved with the kind of games that they make and the company culture and their design choices and everything. I like to read patch notes, so I usually know what they're thinking about.
Your favorite hobby. Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later.
Yeah, thank you. See ya.
That is it for this episode. If you'd like to have some links or see a post where you can comment and discuss, or just read more of our articles about gaming, you can go to our website at agoners.wordpress.com. That's Agoners. You can also follow @Agoners on Twitter, You can also search for Agonisers. We are on YouTube and Twitch. The music in this show was all provided by the absolutely wonderful Promenade Cinema. The intro was taken from a song called Passions in the Back Room. The interlude was from a track called Fading in the Arcade. And this ending music is Cassette Conversations. The next episode of Agonisers will be currently unknown. We will see how this goes and if I want to do another episode anytime soon and what it be about. I will let you know, and do follow us at the previously mentioned addresses to find out what that'll be. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.